Your Eminence, Reverend clergy and monastics, brothers and sisters in Christ, good morning. I am here today to hopefully supplement the beautiful presentations that have already been offered immediately before me, but those have already come to us in this lovely conference. In the aim and purpose statement of this conference, the committee rightly contrasts worldly wokeism to being awake in Christ. However, it postulates, although this truth exists in Orthodox Christian theology, it is not sufficiently emphasized in its encounter with everyday reality. This assertion caught my attention, and today I wish to offer my allotted time to the thought that the Church, by her very presence, is sufficient, and in this encounter, if only we let her be. Unaffected, sober, and traditional orthodoxy is the antidote to intoxicating ideologies, not as a counter-ideology, nor as a medium in which to temper or to be tempered by other ideologies, but as the living word and unchanging truth of God in a dying and fickle world. My brief presentation stems from the context of my personal parish ministry, informed by survey responses from 45 individuals. In considering our topic and considering the influx of proselytes to our community in recent years, this September alone, we inducted a class of 50 catechumens. I thought that I would survey newcomers and some others I knew might have some interest in the topic. With the above assertion in mind, I asked a series of questions that I thought accorded with the concerns of this conference. The results provide a snapshot, I believe, of how the Church is encountering contemporary challenges, specifically among a population that is uniquely primed to recognize or appreciate this. And so I will now walk us briefly through their responses. I asked, if you have been received into the Church, how long has it been? And we note here that the majority have been members of the Church for fewer than 6 months in this survey. And it's important to note that not all the respondents have yet been sacramentally joined to the Church. 5 were still catechumens, and 5 were inquirers intending to become catechumens. The age range was fairly large, but the majority fell into the age category of 20 to 38 years. And this seems to track with greater trends, at least in American Orthodoxy, over the last 5 years or so, as does the following result, that in this case, nearly 70% are male and roughly 30% female. In this sample, most are married, nearly 60%, and 38% are single. This has changed, by the way, since I prepared this. I had 2 who were married to each other, which is a blessing. So the numbers are in flux, as we all, of course, know and expect. Now, don't look too closely at any of these graphs. These are here just to help visualize some of what I'm going to present to you. So nearly a quarter of those who are coming to our particular parish, and I think this might track with many trends in American Orthodoxy, nearly a quarter come from non-denominational Protestantism. The vast majority identify as some form of Christian Protestant denomination. Of these, some are highly involved, while others only bear involved in their community, in their faith community, while others only bear it as a vestige of parental affiliation of their own former involvement in the community. So somebody comes to the Church at the age of 30, and I ask them, what is your background? And they say, well, I was raised Baptist, but I haven't been to church in 20 years. This sort of thing. Some of them, surprisingly, a small number come from a category declaring as none or non-specific spirituality. Both categories had only 3 responders. Nearly 40% say that they studied their way into Orthodoxy. and among them nearly half did so unintentionally. In other words, they were studying Christianity and encountered the fathers and said, "What is this?" and kept digging and ended up at our door. 18% found orthodoxy in online media. 20% are at our church because they were invited by an existing member or catechumen. And certainly some of the categories overlap. 22% reported a combination of these choices. But if nothing else, they indicate that the respondents' perception, the respondents' perception of their exposure to and arrival at the church. Now, asked this question, prior to coming to the Orthodox Church, were you engaged in immoral or otherwise harmful or risky behaviors? A broad question. The results speak for themselves. Nearly 70% said yes, and about 30% said no. This, anecdotally, many in the yes category are products of just nihilistic American consumerism and or counterculture. Significantly, many are covered in tattoos, including tattoo artists. They have piercings, they come from a culture of loose living, but intense social relationships that often revolve around shared interest in music, as I said, tattooing, sexual promiscuity, drug use, abuse, risky behavior, like fighting, reckless driving, and some have experienced gender or sexual identity confusion, including having been in same-sex relationships. There are others who may have engaged in such behaviors despite having some level of affiliation or involvement with their heterodox Christian communion. Then I asked, subsequent to that question, I said, the reality for our respondents. And it shouldn't be surprising to us that the responses vary to this question. Since becoming Orthodox, are you still engaged in those harmful behaviors? The majority state that they are struggling against the passions with the aid of the church. Nearly 18% report that they have completely abandoned an immoral way of life. None report no change has occurred, meaning that in their entry to the church, it has diminished or eradicated their former hedonism, though there was an instance of unexpected trials that arose, but being healed or managed in the context of cultivating an orthodox way of life. 38% respond that they are to some degree still plagued by these things, but are actively confessing and struggling in faith. Shifting from an assessment of their interior life to that of the world around them, 40% report being concerned, seeing about the world at large, seeing that there are many good things in the world, but there are enough troubling things for it to be unsettling. "20% report being troubled. An additional 9% said that it was worse than being only troubled, and nearly 16% say they assess things as good. A small minority even says better than good." And so we come to the question that hinged on my quibble with one of the premises of this conference. Overwhelmingly, at more than 95%, respondents indicate that the church sufficiently addresses societal challenges and concerns, including those that are the focus of this conference. How they ultimately understand that the church does so is, of course, another matter. Not everyone will be privy to a conference like this. Not everyone will be interested in reading some of the papers generated. But it is hinted at in some of the personal remarks that are offered by some of the respondents when prompted earlier in the survey. So I had asked the question, in a few words, what convinced you that you wanted to become an Orthodox Christian? Here are some of the responses. Quote, "The cohesiveness and consistency in its theology and the authority in which it spoke on issues relevant to my life in a way that I have never seen anywhere else." End quote. Quote, "I saw that the only way to life was with God because he is always the answer to all our problems. He will help and guide us." End quote. Quote, "The beauty, tradition, and truth of the church, my first divine liturgy moved me in such a way that I have no words to describe it." End quote. Quote, "Once I learned about the history of Christianity, it was irrefutable that all roads of truth lead to the Orthodox Church and the Orthodox way of life. It is of the kingdom, not of the world," end quote. And finally, quote, "I ended up in a place of total despair after being an atheist my whole life. To save my life, I turned half-heartedly to the only Christianity I knew in non-denominational Protestantism. That led me quickly back to hopelessness, and worse than before. At the point I was seriously ready to die, I discovered Orthodoxy for the first time, and I knew that the truth I'd been searching for is here," end quote. And so what follows are a series of topics that respondents were asked to rate based on their level of concern on a scale of 5, with five indicating a high level of concern or worry. And I'll run through them just briefly. But one thing to point out is just we see a very similar curve. All the responses trend the same way. By the way, I'm no statistician. I'm not a scientist. This is just a way to visualize the responses that I received. The topics in no particular order, the level of concern: technology, 36%, AI, 49%, social media, 49%, news reporting, 53%, gender issues, 60%, same-sex or other orientation ideologies, 47%, redefinition of marriage, 53%, polarization of political, social, and cultural ideologies, 47%. And as you can see from this curve, the penultimate category is significant as well. So it's weighted towards a higher level of concern on all of these issues. While we see a similar curve with respect to the spread of concern over all the topics, gender issues tops the list at 60%, followed by the redefinition of marriage at 53%, and news reporting at 53%. All three of these resonate with a post-truth nightmare. Somewhat surprisingly to me, I admit, were the responses about concern over socioeconomic pressures and social unrest, actually having middling responses. I say I'm surprised because a number of the young men that come to the church, when I speak with them, many of them have a concern about what their future will be. How do they understand how it is to be a man, to have work, to start a family, to find a home, and these sorts of things. So I was genuinely surprised to see this result. And also with regard to considerations for social unrest, a very middling response. At the time of the survey, almost 90% of the respondents subjectively reported good to fair mental health. This trend starts at the other end for this category. Now, with regard to the remedies, now again, don't worry too much with the categories. It's just to show the overall trend. On this scale, 1 is actually the higher, the greater, the more positive response. And so the question was, how helpful are these things in the life of the church? And so I asked, again, in no particular order, the church's historical foundation and breadth of experience, 78% said immensely helpful. Liturgy and worship, 82%. Private study, 56%. Group study, 40%. Personal prayer or prayer rule, 84%. The reality of spiritual warfare, 69%. Fellowship with Orthodox peers, 62%. Preaching and teaching from the clergy, 84%. Mentoring from lay members, 44%. Counsel from the priest or spiritual father, 84%. Receiving Holy Communion, 82%. This is skewed by the catechumens responding, of course, in the survey. Also with confession at 67%. The lives and/or intercessions of the saints, 69%. Teaching on morality, 65%. Theology, 80%. Anthropology, 53%. Venerating relics, 44%. The Jesus prayer, 87%. And sacred imagery, music, and architecture, 80%. So the responses in the extreme almost doubled the categories of concern. We see the importance of things like the sacramental life, of confession, of counsel from their priests, and notably the prayer rule, which of course factored in to earlier presentations. And so to close, I simply wanted to say the following. With these results in mind, we do well to recall the response to the question, does the Church sufficiently address societal challenges and concerns? And it was a resounding 96% yes. It should be emphasized again, I offer these findings aware of their largely anecdotal nature, a lack of scientific controls, accounting for statistical errors, and so on. This is an unscientific survey of a relatively small sample of a single parish in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America in the metropolis of Atlanta, one of 3 Greek Orthodox parishes in the Charlotte, North Carolina region. To draw definitive conclusions from my survey would be irresponsible. But all that being true, I nevertheless believe that this snapshot indicates the Church in her very active being is sufficiently emphasizing wakefulness to Christ. Of course, there again are variables that may be at play, a clergyman's particular style of preaching, the richness of our liturgical life, educational initiatives in the parish, community reinforcing activities, etc. But do we not confess our trust in a Church that is one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic? Is it not the self-same Spirit leading us into all truth? Does not our loving Father provide bread and fish, not stone and serpent, when his hungry children come to him? Is Jesus Christ not the same yesterday, today, and forever? Is ours not the faith once and for all delivered to the saints? Every divine liturgy, brothers and sisters, is a jubilant reclamation of what was lost in Eden, a vibrant thrumming of God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a percussive echo of Moses' encounter with the great I Am, a collective gasp at the implantation of the Word in flesh, an irradiant blast of the resurrection, a continuous cyclonic lashing by the rushing winds of Pentecost. And so as we say in English, I'm preaching to the choir. You all know and believe these things. There have been and still will be many presenters able to offer you words and thoughts that are much deeper than my own, but perhaps in my own little piece of this larger mosaic, we will all find reassurance and motivation to continue allowing the Church to simply be, first in ourselves and also in our various efforts for the gospel, come what may. I thank you for your attention and consideration.